Tonight, settle in as we drift into the quiet story behind Gabe Newell's rise, the path that shaped Valve and Steam. Breathe, get comfortable, and let the noise fade. Why did Gabe Newell leave a secure path when comfort beckoned? What quiet conviction led the engineer to build something unproven? Gabe Logan Newell was born in Colorado on November the 3rd of 1962, and he grew up in the gentle sprawl of Davis, California, where tree-lined streets and a university town's steady rhythms shaped a straightforward childhood. The Newell household was practical, not showy, with routines built around school, chores, and a modest regard for tools that worked well and lasted. As a boy, Newell delivered newspapers in the early hours and learned the plain habit of showing up. And later, in a small rite of passage that belongs to another era, he worked as a telegram messenger for Western Union, taking messages door to door with a fixed calm. The young messenger absorbed the cadence of other people's schedules, the way deadlines were simply met and not dramatized, and this quiet discipline stayed with him. In time, he found ways to spend hours around whatever computers he could reach, and he noticed that he relaxed when he understood how a system fit together. Those early deliveries and first glimpses of computing formed a simple picture in his mind, one where reliability and curiosity could share the same table. High school in Davis brought Newell closer to the university's orbit, and in the 1970s, that often meant a room with a humming mainframe, a stack of punch cards, and a line printer that answered back in its own patient way. Newell tried a text Star Trek game, fed the cards into the reader, and learned that waiting for output could be oddly peaceful if the mind understood the steps that had been set in motion. The process taught him that the rhythm of computing was not a series of clever tricks, but a steady conversation with rules. He learned to keep notes, to test thoughts carefully, and to accept that the machine would do exactly what it was told, no more and no less. Friends remember a teenager who did not rush to impress, who preferred to figure out how to make something work and then quietly hand it over. In those years, he built a simple preference that stayed with him for decades, a preference for tools that made other people's days smoother. The habit of giving a working thing to someone else and waiting for their reaction without fuss suited his temperament. That small, patient loop would one day scale to an audience of millions, yet it never lost its plainness in his mind. Harvard University in the early 1980s gave Newell new rooms to study in and new people to draw lessons from, though the strongest lessons arrived from outside the campus gates. Newell visited his brother at a young Microsoft, and he met a culture that prized direct experimentation, measurable results, and the sense that software could be improved in quick, concrete steps. He listened more than he spoke, and he weighed the difference between lectures and living projects, and slowly it became clear where the energy drew him. When an offer to join Microsoft became real, the student chose work and accepted the risk of leaving a prestigious path. The transition did not feel rebellious to Newell, it felt practical, and he would later say in a plain tone that he learned more in a few months at Microsoft than in his years at school. The experience did not diminish his respect for education. It simply showed him that his learning accelerated when he was inside a team and shipping something real. The decision revealed a steady appetite for environments where feedback arrives quickly and where the boundaries are shaped by what customers actually do. Microsoft in those years ran on brisk cycles and clear assignments, and Newell settled into long hours with a sense of purpose. He worked on early releases of Windows and learned that details determine whether a broad idea becomes a product that people trust. The discipline of shipping an operating system demanded coordination across teams, and it tuned his ear for how small choices ripple through a complex whole. Newell watched strong colleagues debate quite openly and then return to their desks to implement whatever the data supported. The company's pace taught him how to hold two thoughts at once, to respect both bold direction and humble iteration, and not to dramatize the tension between them. He developed a feel for tools that reduced friction for others, a taste that would later define much of his career. The young producer absorbed the value of matching ambition to execution, and he kept watching closely for paths that served the people who used the software, not just the people who made it. A spark arrived from outside the company's walls, delivered not by a memo, but by a game that spread through shareware with an ease that challenged assumptions. Doom and then Quake showed an opposite route to reach customers, one that did not rely on large sales teams or traditional release paths. Newell helped with a Windows port that demonstrated how high-performance games could live comfortably on the platform he had been building, and that hands-on effort left a mark. The success of direct distribution and the vitality of mod communities suggested a new type of software business, one where the line between developer and player was shorter and more interactive. Another signal came when Michael Abrash left Microsoft to work at ID Software, a move that underlined how valuable it could be to chase a promising frontier even if the path looked narrow from the outside. Newell weighed the hours he spent maintaining a platform against the hours he wanted to spend making something that touched players more directly, and gently the balance shifted. The decision to leave Microsoft grew over months rather than days, and it crystallized not as a rebellion, but as a choice to do a different kind of work. Newell and his colleague Mike Harrington pooled their resources and founded Valve in 1996, renting a modest office and keeping the staff small enough to know everyone's strengths by sight. The new studio licensed technology from ID Software and began building a first-person game that would keep the player inside a believable world with convincing behavior and story cues that flowed without breaking the moment. The project's internal names shifted as ideas converged, and the team kept folding experiments into what became Half-Life, using a modified engine and tools that they tailored with care. Newell's role was to remove obstacles and make sure people had what they needed, not to stand at the front of the room and declare certainties. The founder's habit of quiet problem-solving guided the early studio through ordinary growing pains, and he kept his focus on whether the player would feel a steady sense of presence. The release of Half-Life in 1998 carried the unmistakable feeling of a studio finding its voice. Critics praised the game's atmosphere and pacing, and players returned to it in great numbers, not for spectacle alone, but for the way its world obeyed consistent rules. Valve's reputation rose, and so did the responsibility to keep the new audience well served. Newell did not celebrate loudly. He asked what worked in concrete terms and how to preserve it. The studio supported expansions and nurtured a healthy mod community, gradually learning that the most interesting ideas often arise from outside a company's walls. A decision to hire the creators of promising modifications became part of the culture, and the team behind Team Fortress brought class-based multiplayer to the company's portfolio with natural ease. The flow of talent into Valve showed the founder that his role was to build an environment where creative people could do their best work and be heard. As the years turned, Counter-Strike emerged from a modification into a phenomenon, one of those straight lines between a small team's focus and the needs of millions of players that become obvious only in hindsight. Valve brought the creators inside, helped refine the systems, and supported the game as it spread through cafes and home networks with a patient rhythm. Newell watched the growth with the calm of a shopkeeper whose shelves had to be stocked every day, and he understood that a multiplayer community lives on trust, stability, and steady support. The lesson again was that players respond when a system respects their time, and he tucked that away as a principle. A service mindset had begun to eclipse a product mindset, and the studio's patronage of mods and community tools continued quietly. This was not an abstract philosophy. It was an answer to a simple question the founder kept asking himself: whether people could count on what Valve provided. The ambition to build a sequel to Half-Life set another level of difficulty for the studio. Valve developed a new engine, cultivated advanced physics and animation, and took larger risks on storytelling and technical pipelines. Newell's attention moved between the needs of a complex production and an emerging idea that the way games reached people was about to change. The studio encountered a serious crisis when the source code for the sequel leaked before release, and the shock of that moment required restraint and careful communication. Newell addressed players with an unusual degree of directness, asked for help in understanding what had happened, and held the team's focus steady through the delay that followed. The response balanced transparency and resolve, and in time, Half-Life 2 arrived with the strength of a project that had learned through adversity. The episode left deep grooves in the founders' thinking about security, about the importance of clear channels to customers, and about the need to control distribution more directly. A legal disagreement with a publisher over digital rights eventually cleared path for a distribution system that Valve would own and operate, and the studio moved ahead with a platform that could deliver updates, reduce patching friction, and keep customers connected to the games they played. Steam launched with rough edges and skepticism from parts of the community, and early requirements for online activation pressed on habits that had formed in an era of discs and boxes. The founder listened through the noise for signal, measured the service's reliability, and kept improving its core tasks, from automatic updates to billing to community features. What convinced Newell to press ahead with the store, most people did not want yet. In the studio's private arithmetic, the prospect of serving players directly outweighed the discomfort of introducing change, and a long horizon pointed to a world where digital delivery would become the norm. As Steam found its footing, Newell spoke in calm terms about a hard topic, noting that the best way to reduce piracy was to provide a better service. The short sentence he used for this idea became well known, and it was delivered without theatrics. Piracy is a service problem. The conviction behind those words came not from a slogan, but from data, from watching regions that had been written off respond positively when the product arrived promptly in their language at a fair price and without unnecessary friction. The platform grew in features and stability, and the studio's releases benefited from a distribution path that reduced distance between developer and player. Newell's role remained consistent: to clear paths for teams, to insist on measuring reality rather than assuming it, and to keep asking whether each change made life easier for the people on the other side of the screen. The service lens gradually reframed the company's work, and it pointed toward a model where the game and the platform supported one another over many years. Inside the company, a distinctive culture took shape, openly described in a handbook that surprised outsiders with its emphasis on trust and autonomy. Newell believed that titles and rigid hierarchies slowed good work, so he built an environment where desks rolled on wheels. People aligned themselves to projects where they could be most useful, and feedback traveled through peer review and delivered examples rather than formal authority. The system was not weightless. It relied on responsibility and earned respect, and it worked because the founder modeled the behavior he wanted to see, quietly solving problems and listening carefully. Valve's teams learned to think in terms of long support lives, ongoing updates, and communities that would remain active for years. The culture's success did not hinge on infinite freedom. It depended on commitment to the customer, and Newell kept returning to that anchor. The tone of the place matched the tone of its patron, a steady confidence that value would find an audience if the work stayed honest. The creative range of Valve's catalog widened while Steam matured, and in 2007 a collection called the Orange Box introduced a broad audience to Portal, the refined, witty puzzle game that grew from a student project at DigiPen. Newell recognized the talent of the small team, brought them inside, and let the concept find its final shape through iteration and careful playtesting. The result balanced novelty with clarity, treats with restraint, and a gentle learning curve with genuine challenge, a combination that suited Valve's growing identity. The company supported the game alongside new episodes in the Half-Life series and a new take on Team Fortress with a striking visual style, and the range of tones allowed different teams to show their best qualities. Newell watched like a craftsman whose shop had several branches, making sure each kept enough resources and attention to serve its customers well. The calm insistence on function over flash helped the studio avoid showy missteps. A year later, Valve released Left 4 Dead, the cooperative game developed with Turtle Rock and refined in-house, a project that taught the company lessons about social design and shared tension that would influence later work. The new game drew people into acting together with few words and crisp incentives, and it rewarded players who looked out for one another. Newell paid attention to how the game systems encouraged helpful behavior and how the community responded to steady updates. The studio released a sequel and long maintained support, learning that co-op rhythms benefit from careful tuning and not from splashy reinvention. The founder's taste for durable tools appeared again in the way the game's director systems quietly adjusted challenge in response to player performance, as if the experience itself were a kind of service. This pattern of building, observing, and refining without dramatic announcements increasingly defined how Valve developed its work. Team Fortress 2 moved from a traditional pay model to free-to-play after years of updates, an experiment built on data and controlled by a simple promise to avoid pay-to-win dynamics. The in-game economy grew from small items and cosmetics into a lively marketplace with its own etiquette, and the studio watched player behavior with care. Newell and his colleagues had come to think of their games as durable communities rather than one-time releases, and this shift made sense given the evidence. The change showed the value of earnable items and goodwill, and it highlighted the studio's capacity to sustain a game's life with regular attention. The founder liked how this long support mirrored the craft of maintaining a good tool, and how the model aligned incentives between the company and its players. The emphasis remained on respect rather than pressure, and the community's trust deepened over time. Dota 2 emerged from a beloved community game into a global service under Valve's stewardship, and the company's role included organizing an international tournament with a large prize pool and a format that let fans contribute to the event through an in-game booklet. The compendium helped connect players to the spectacle in a more personal way, and it introduced a funding structure that would echo through other parts of the industry. Newell's presence at the tournament was unassuming, genial, and instructive for employees who watched him greet players and team members with the same quiet attention. The founder liked seeing the long arc of a game sustained by consistent support and by a sense of shared ownership. The lesson he took from these years was that communities respond not to persuasion, but to reliability, and that good stewardship is a long, steady commitment. The tournament became an annual rhythm, a set of dates around which fans arranged time with friends. In public talks around this period, Newell warned gently that closed platforms could harm the pace of innovation he valued, and he looked to Linux and open approaches as safeguards. The momentum of Steam in the living room and the idea of devices built to extend the service into new places underlined that hope. He put it in simple words, almost as a note to self. Linux is the future of gaming. The line expressed a preference for openness that matched his experience, and it pointed toward experiments in hardware that would try to put that preference into practice. Under his guidance, the company introduced Big Picture Mode, designed controllers and living room machines, and continued to learn how difficult it is to ship hardware at scale. Newell's reaction to setbacks remained measured. The work continued, and the teams tried again with clearer ideas. Steam machines and the first Steam controller met mixed receptions and hard lessons about supply chains and user expectations, teaching Valve that execution in hardware requires a level of predictability that only comes with practice. The founder took the lessons in stride, asking what the company had learned and how to fold those lessons back into the platform and into future devices. A streaming device gave way to software that handled the same task more flexibly, and the company placed its bets where it could serve the most people. These efforts did not receive grand speeches. They were simply part of the ongoing cycle of trying, supporting, and trying again. Newell remained patient with the idea that understanding arrives through work, and he resisted the temptation to market dreams that the company had not yet delivered. The consistency of tone reassured partners and players alike. The company's one serious misread of community sentiment during these years involved an attempt to introduce paid mods for a popular role-playing game through the Steam Workshop. The idea started from respect for creators and a belief that compensation would increase quality and support sustained work. But the rollout collided with expectations and norms in a way that created swift backlash. Newell entered public conversation directly, answered questions for hours, and then withdrew the feature. The episode did not lead to defensiveness inside Valve. Instead, the founder emphasized listening, repair, and the importance of learning from mismatches between intention and effect. The company later found quieter ways to support creators that were better aligned with the communities involved. The tone of regret was not dramatic. It was simple and sincere, and it reaffirmed a commitment to making changes when customers were not being well served. Valve's exploration of virtual reality grew from partnerships and in-house research, and the company's work on a room-scale system and controllers that mapped hand presence made the medium feel more embodied. Newell supported sustained investment in the space because he saw it as a field where tools and experiences needed to be invented together. The release of a high-end headset and controllers set a standard for fidelity, while the studio's return to its most famous world in a virtual reality game of its own showed that the company would only ask players to change habits when it could deliver a reason to change. The game's reception, warmly appreciative of craft and careful detail, suited the founder's sense of pacing. The lessons stayed the same: to earn a community's time by meeting the moment with thoughtful design and stable support. A global pandemic arrived with its own unpredictable currents, and Newell found himself in New Zealand after a planned visit accidentally became an extended stay. The country's public health approach allowed life to continue with more ease than in many places, and he quietly arranged a free event to thank the people who had hosted him, raising funds for a children's hospital and standing alongside local partners. The gesture fit his way of doing things, practical gratitude expressed through an event that others could enjoy. Newell spoke warmly of the country's spirit and the welcome he felt there, and he chose his words carefully when asked about future plans. The episode broadened a personal connection with a place that had shown him kindness, and he returned to work with the sense that generosity and steadiness could share the same sentence. The memory of that time became part of his private accounting of what matters most. Valve returned to hardware with a portable device that took what the company had learned about open software, compatibility layers, and ergonomic endurance, and combined it with the manufacturing partners who could deliver at scale. The result addressed a steady wish among players to take a library wherever a day might lead without changing the character of how personal computers work. Newell focused on the user experience and on the service layers that would make the device feel invisible when it behaved as a conduit to games players already owned. Launches that unfolded during supply constraints required patience and clear communication, and the company managed expectations with the same calm cadence as before. The device's success rested on respect for openness and a refusal to place barriers between the player and what they had already chosen. The approach echoed a theme from the founder's earliest decisions, that trust is built by keeping promises quietly. In the same period, Newell continued to carry the studio's service mindset into new spaces. Some experiments did not reach as far as intended, as when a card game meant to test new design ideas found only a modest audience, prompting an attempt to rebuild it, and then a final decision to archive it. The mood inside Valve around this effort did not turn sour. Instead, the founder reminded his colleagues that experiments are honest only if the company is willing to acknowledge when the fit is not there. Teams moved on without blame, and the platform kept improving. What would the next experiment teach the company? The question asked itself in the hallways and in video calls, and it found its answer, as usual, in measured work rather than predictions. The biography of a founder can seem like a list of releases and pivots, but Newell's life includes quieter chapters that say as much about his character as the most celebrated milestones. He married Lisa Mennett in 1996. The same year, he founded Valve with Mike Harrington, and together they raised 2 sons. Family time in Washington State included small rituals rather than grand gestures, and friends describe a father who kept his voice even and his attention steady. Newell also faced a personal medical challenge in the form of an inherited eye condition that he treated with corneal transplants, and he spoke later about how the experience reinforced his appreciation for patient, methodical care. The founder's manner in recounting those years matched his work habits, candid and undramatic, with gratitude for those whose skill restored his sight. Personal and professional lessons blended into a single outlook, one that values reliability, modesty, and the long view. Outside games, Newell developed a strong interest in the oceans, funding deep-sea research and placing tools in the hands of scientists who could explore the least-known parts of the planet. He supported teams who operated vessels designed to reach extreme depths, not as a spectacle, but as a way to push knowledge forward and to build new instruments along the way. The work appealed to his respect for endurance and precision, and to his sense that great discoveries often arrive from patient accumulation. He quietly acquired and recommissioned proven platforms, brought experienced crews together with academic leaders, and let the mission define the headlines rather than personal promotion. The sea's steadiness and the demands of deep work matched his temperament. The simple idea that a tool well maintained can change what people know found yet another expression far from any screen. Another frontier drew Newell's attention in recent years: the study of neural interfaces that may help treat illness and, in time, expand the way humans interact with machines. He backed a small company dedicated to creating minimally invasive devices with careful respect for safety and medical impact, and he spoke with plain optimism about what careful engineering might make possible over time. The line between speculative hype and genuine progress can be thin in this domain, and Newell favored the grounded path, supporting teams who wanted to build devices and test them methodically. The interest did not come from idle futurism. It grew from decades of thinking about interfaces and from a personal respect for clinical rigor. His view remained the same, that meaningful changes unfold through steady, transparent work rather than sharp announcements. He treated the new field as another place where patient tools might pay dividends if guided well. Through all of these arcs, Newell's reputation among colleagues and communities rested on consistent habits. He would ask a question and then wait for the answer without interrupting. He would give a direct assessment of what was working and what was not, in language simple enough to be acted upon. He kept rare appearances rare not from indifference, but from a belief that attention is better used building than performing. The founder avoided perfect narratives about the past, and he allowed the record to show both the clear successes and the missteps from which the company learned. He carried through the same themes from his boyhood roots in Davis, that a person who shows up with something that works earns trust over time, and that the only brand worth having is the habit of making other people's days a bit easier. A life in public inevitably accrues quotes, and some of Newell's have been repeated widely because they distill lessons that were learned slowly. When he said that piracy was a problem of service, he meant it in the most literal way, and he acted on it with tangible changes to how his company served regions long neglected. When he said that Linux was the future of gaming, he was expressing a preference for openness that he tried to embody across devices and operating systems, even when the path involved stubborn obstacles. Those short lines have stayed in circulation, not because they were clever, but because they were tied to work that followed. Their endurance reflects the weight of the quiet decisions behind them, rather than any talent for slogans. Recognition arrived in the form of honors from peers and institutions, and Newell accepted them with the same sparing words he used for most public occasions. Awards that named a lifetime of contribution mattered to him because they belonged to teams, communities, and an industry that had taught him as much as he had given. He tended to deflect praise toward colleagues and toward the long list of engineers, artists, support staff, and partners who had turned solitary experiments into shared experiences. The calmness of his acceptance speeches reflected a conviction that the work is the point, not the category. In his mind, any distinction that pulled attention away from serving players had to be treated with care. In the broader culture of technology and entertainment, Newell's careful approach formed a contrast with louder styles. He showed that a company could avoid annual stage shows and still shape an industry if it invested in the layers that other people rely on each day. He demonstrated that an idea can be both humble and transformative if it treats the customer's time as the most precious resource in the system. He also showed that a person can maintain a low profile and still lead, by aligning efforts, clearing obstacles, and letting results speak. His manner suggested that one can speak softly and carry the discipline required to ship, support, and improve for decades. The model is not romantic, but it is durable, and it has served millions. The strands of Newell's work converge on a simple promise: to combine reliability with curiosity. Whether in software distribution, in game design, in hardware experiments, in work on the ocean, or in cautious support for new medical interfaces, the founder has tried to make something sturdy enough to be used and open enough to be improved. The promise does not rely on a single product. It rests on a way of acting and a way of treating other people's time. He has chosen environments where feedback is honest and where audiences respond without being pushed, because that is how truth reaches the desk of a builder. The long arc of his career is not a story of single strokes, but of many small lines drawn in the same direction. A simple detail from those early mornings in Davis can stand here at the end. A boy with a bag of newspapers walking a quiet street at first light, putting things where people expect to find them. The habit stayed with Gabe Newell as the scale changed around him, and as the tools grew more complex and the communities larger. The work remained the same at its core: to deliver something useful on time, to adjust when the world changed, and to keep the voice steady when others grew loud. He kept moving without spectacle, and his projects kept arriving with the unforced assurance of useful things. The picture that emerges is quiet and clear: a life spent building with patience and then building again.